Now that you've completed your self-assessment inventory and you've been matched with a job that the inventory thinks is right for you, there's still some more questions you need to ask about your specific type of work. And we want to understand that there are different types that exist within each job. So if you found the result to be a good match with your personality, you want to explore whether you're going to do that job as a full-time or a part-time career. And you want to know what those two terms mean. So make sure that you put both of these in your Unit 1 vocabulary list, but we'll start with part-time. A part-time is an employee who works an average of less than 30 hours per week. Some weeks they could work 30, some weeks they can work less than 30, some weeks they could work a lot less than 30. But any way you spin it, part-time is less than 30 hours, whereas full-time, if you chose to pursue a job full-time, that would mean that you're committing to at least 30 hours per week, meaning more. So the average work week, according to Americans, is 40. That's a standard work week, 40 hours a week. So doing more than 30 is considered full-time. Doing 40 or more is considered standard and definitely full-time. Please write these terms in your vocabulary. There are different ways that your job can pay you, and these four listed here should also be in your Unit 1 vocabulary list. Wage is the term that they use for hourly pay. When you're paid a wage, you are paid a set amount for every hour that you work. So if you work part-time, under 30 hours a week, you get paid for those hours. So if it's 25 hours that week, you get paid for 25 hours. Whereas if you're working a standard work week of 40, you get paid for 40 hours that week. The size of your paycheck depends on how much you work. Salary is a little different. You're paid the same amount in every check when you are paid salary. So if one week you work a lot and the next week you work a little, it doesn't matter. You'll get the same amount on payday. The size of the paycheck depends on how your company wants to divide it. So if they want to divide it and pay you weekly, every Friday you'll get a paycheck. So they take the salary amount and divide it by 52. That's how many weeks are in a year. If they decide they want to pay you monthly, they take the salary amount and divide it by 12 because that's how many months are in a year. And so you'll get paid every month base. Maybe it's the last day of the month or maybe it's the first day of the next month. But either way, a salary check is the same every time. A stipend is something you are paid for doing something extra. Teachers in this school that choose to coach a sport or advise a club are paid with a stipend system. So at the end of the school year, all of the club advisors get a paycheck for advising their club. At the end of the season, the coaches get a paycheck for coaching a sport. So at the end of the football season, the football coaches all get a stipend. Some jobs might do it differently and spread out the money throughout a bunch of different checks, but South Brunswick High School stipend pay is definitely one check at the end. Lastly, I want you to know what the term commission and tips are, and I put them together because they're very similar. Commission and tips, two different terms depending on where you work, but it's money based on the quality of your performance, how well you do. So if you are getting commission checks, that typically means you work in sales. And if you sell a certain amount, you'll make more money. So if, say, you are a person who sells furniture, the more couches you sell, the more commission you make, meaning your check will get bigger and bigger. It's based on how well you are as a salesperson. If you perform well at a restaurant, if you are a server, like a waitress or a waiter, and the people at your table really like you, or you bring them their food pretty quickly, they might give you a bigger tip. So in other places, it's not called commission, it's called tip. But again, it's based on how well you do your job. There are a few different types of unpaid work that I do want you to think about before you jump into the job world, because it really is all about gaining experience. So you could volunteer for a company or an organization without getting paid. Usually that's not a part-time gig. That's usually a part-time gig, not a full-time gig. But this is a good way to figure out if a job is something you really want to do, if you volunteer there. So let's just say that the self-assessment inventory matched you with, say, being a nurse. And you volunteer at a hospital, because a lot of hospitals around this area do take student volunteers. And within the first week, you get to see a surgery, or you go do something with a doctor that you just decide, oh, heck no, this is not for me. That volunteer experience has helped you not make a bad decision. It's helped you to decide that this isn't the right job for me. You're doing something nice for the community at the same time, though, because you are helping out at a hospital, so you are working with people who are in need. So it's a feel-good experience, but it also helps you determine whether the job that you've decided on is the right job for you. An intern is usually a student or a trainee who works with or without pay, and they could be working at a place where they actually could get a job at the end as well. So you could be paid a wage or a stipend, or it could be an unpaid situation. An intern could be someone who works with a plumber for a little bit to learn that particular trade and maybe get paid for it. Or an intern could be a student teacher who works in a school to become a teacher someday but won't get paid for it. A lot of times being an intern or doing this kind of practice can lead to a job offer. So if you work in a particular place and you do a great job and you leave a good impression on the boss, when there's an opening, they might call you to come back and work for them. Internships are usually more career-oriented, where volunteering is more about providing assistance to people in need. Employment agencies are something that you should also be familiar with, since we are talking about getting a job. So once you've done your research, which we've done a little of with the job analysis, and you've decided whether you want to be a part-time or a full-time employee, and maybe you've even done some volunteering just to be sure, it's time to start looking for the job. An employment agency helps job seekers find a job that's a good fit for them. So they might do an assessment of some sort just to see whether or not you're a perfect fit, and then help you find a place to do that particular work. There's a type of employment agency called a temporary agency, or a temp agency, they sometimes call it, and that will find you a part-time or a full-time job temporarily. So you don't get to work there forever. You might only be able to stay for a couple of months with that contract. Some temporary jobs could become permanent, but then you're no longer working with the temp agency. So sometimes in the summer, teachers will go to a temp agency to find a job just for July and August. If they really loved it and the company offered them a position, they could quit their teaching job, but they would also have to sign off of the temp agency. So the temp agency is no longer helping them keep that job. It's really based on their performance from there on out. The third type of way that you might get a job is using or being called by a headhunter. This is an employment agency that seeks out highly qualified people to fill important positions for an employer. So like a headhunter could be specifically working for Apple or specifically working for Google. And if Google or Apple needs, say, a supervisor, then a headhunter goes out, goes through a bunch of resumes, goes to a bunch of different employment agencies, looks on a bunch of different websites, and finds the perfect person for that job and brings that person back to Apple. So they work specifically for the employer. They work specifically for Google or Apple. If you're ready and you're looking for a job, to find more job information, you could go online. There are career and employment sites everywhere. Monster.com, Indeed.com. They're all places that will actually help you find the applications and the details about places you could work or places that have openings. There are newspaper websites and company websites. So if you know for a fact you want to work for a specific company, you love Nike or you love Under Armour, and you will definitely want to work for them, you could go to their company website and look under a tab that might say something like employment opportunities or join our team. That means that those are the openings in the company. You could also try the school counselor at the high school or a school counselor in a college or a vocational school. They could definitely help you get hooked up with a place that would be fitting for your career search. Just keep in mind that every experience you have, paid or unpaid, can be put into a work history. And a work history, even though I spelled it walk over here, don't make fun of me. A work history is a record of the jobs you've held and how long you've stayed with each employer. And we've already used this word before, so you don't necessarily have to write this one in your list, but this particular experience, say as a volunteer, or maybe you do an internship, you put that in your work history. So when you sit down in an interview, you can show whoever is interviewing you that you've actually done this job somewhere already and that you might be great at it already as well. So although you don't need to add work history to your list, you want to put in employment agency, temporary agency, and headhunter, volunteer and intern, wage, salary, stipend, and commissions and tips could be together, part-time and full-time. So in total, again, there are 11 terms that should be in your Unit 1 vocabulary.